Nina Carter stood on the sidewalk watching the rain pour down, clutching her blue umbrella as water pooled around her worn sneakers. At 27, she had learned to find joy in small things, because life had taught her that big dreams often led to bigger disappointments. She worked as a barista at a coffee shop downtown, and today had been particularly exhausting with back-to-back rushes and a broken espresso machine that made every order take twice as long. She was waiting for the bus when she noticed a man standing a few feet away without any protection from the downpour. He wore a nice suit that was getting thoroughly soaked, and he seemed to be searching his pockets for something he clearly could not find. Nina hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer and angling her umbrella to cover both of them. The man looked up in surprise, and Nina found herself meeting kind brown eyes that held genuine appreciation. He thanked her with a slight accent she could not quite place, and Nina shrugged and said it was no problem because the umbrella was big enough for two people. The man introduced himself as Marco, and Nina told him her name in return. They stood together under the blue umbrella, waiting for their respective buses, and Marco asked if she had been caught in the rain unexpectedly. Nina explained she had been expecting rain, but her umbrella was all she had to protect herself from the weather. Marco mentioned he had forgotten his umbrella at home that morning, which was unusual for him because he was normally quite prepared. Nina laughed and said everyone had those days where nothing seemed to go according to plan. They fell into easy conversation, and Nina found herself enjoying talking to this stranger who seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. He asked about her work, and she told him about the coffee shop and the regular customers who brightened her day. When Nina's bus arrived, she hesitated before boarding because Marco was still waiting for his ride. She offered to let him keep the umbrella, saying she could manage the short walk from the bus stop to her apartment. Marco protested that he could not take her only protection from the rain, but Nina insisted with a smile. She told him he could return it another day if their paths crossed again, and before Marco could argue further, she had pressed the umbrella into his hands and boarded the bus. As the bus pulled away, Nina caught a glimpse of Marco standing under the blue umbrella, looking after her with an expression of surprise and something that might have been admiration. She settled into her seat feeling unexpectedly happy despite being damp from the rain. It felt good to do something kind for someone, even if it meant she would get a little wet on her walk home later. The next morning, Nina arrived at the coffee shop for her shift and was surprised to find a package waiting for her behind the counter. Her coworker explained that a man had dropped it off before they opened, saying it was for Nina specifically. Inside the package was her blue umbrella, cleaned and looking better than it had in years, along with a note written in elegant handwriting. The note thanked her for her kindness and invited her to dinner as a way of returning the favor properly. It was signed simply with Marco's name and a phone number. Nina found herself smiling as she tucked the note into her apron pocket. She debated whether to accept the invitation because she knew nothing about this man beyond their brief conversation in the rain, but something about the gesture felt genuine rather than presumptuous. That evening, Nina sent a text to the number on the note, saying she would be happy to have dinner with him. Marco responded almost immediately, suggesting a casual restaurant in her neighborhood for the following evening. Nina appreciated that he had chosen somewhere modest rather than trying to impress her with an expensive venue, and she agreed to meet him there. The next evening, Nina arrived at the restaurant wearing her nicest dress, which was still quite simple compared to what other women in the restaurant wore. Marco was already there, and he stood when she approached, greeting her with the same warm smile she remembered from their encounter in the rain. They ordered food and fell back into easy conversation, and Nina found herself laughing more than she had in months. Marco asked thoughtful questions about her life, her dreams, and her daily routines, and he seemed genuinely interested in her answers. Nina asked about his work, and Marco explained he worked in business management, which seemed vague, but Nina did not press for details. As the evening progressed, Nina realized she was developing feelings for this kind stranger who had come into her life so unexpectedly. Over the following weeks, Nina and Marco continued to see each other regularly. He would visit her at the coffee shop during her breaks, and they would take walks through the park or share meals at modest restaurants. Marco always seemed comfortable in these simple settings, never suggesting anything extravagant or beyond Nina's budget. She appreciated his consideration and the way he seemed to value her company above any material concerns. 3 months into their relationship, Marco invited Nina to attend an event with him, explaining it was a work function and he would love to have her by his side. Nina agreed, though she felt nervous about meeting his colleagues. On the evening of the event, Marco picked her up in a car much nicer than she had expected, and they drove to a venue that made Nina's anxiety spike considerably. The building was clearly expensive, with valets and elegant decorations everywhere Nina looked. As they entered, people began greeting Marco with deference that confused Nina completely. A woman addressed him as Mr. Rossi, and suddenly Nina noticed the way everyone seemed to treat Marco with respect that went beyond simple professional courtesy. During a quiet moment, Nina pulled Marco aside and asked him directly what was happening. Marco took a deep breath and admitted he had not been completely honest with her about his work. He was not simply in business management, but rather the CEO of a large international company his family had built over generations. He had been taking time away from the corporate headquarters to oversee a new branch opening in the city, and he had been enjoying the freedom of relative anonymity. When Nina had shared her umbrella with him, she had treated him like a regular person, and he had found that incredibly refreshing. Nina felt her stomach drop because this changed everything she thought she knew about their relationship. She asked why he had not told her the truth from the beginning, and Marco admitted he had been afraid she would treat him differently if she knew. He said he had fallen in love with the way she saw him as just Marco, not as a CEO or a wealthy man. He apologized for the deception, but said his feelings for her were completely genuine. Nina needed time to process this information, and she told Marco honestly that she felt confused and somewhat betrayed by the omission. Marco understood and said he would give her whatever space she needed. Nina left the event early and spent the next few days thinking about everything she had learned. Her friends had mixed reactions when she told them, with some saying she should be thrilled, and others warning her about the complications that came with such different backgrounds. After a week of consideration, Nina called Marco and asked if they could talk. They met at the park where they had taken many walks together, and Nina told him she understood why he had wanted to keep his identity private initially. She said she could even appreciate his desire to be seen as a regular person. However, she needed him to understand that moving forward, their relationship had to be built on complete honesty, or it simply could not work. Marco agreed wholeheartedly and promised he would never hide anything from her again. He told Nina he loved her for exactly who she was and did not want her to change anything about herself. Nina admitted she had fallen in love with him too, though she was still nervous about what dating someone of his status would mean for her life. Marco assured her they would figure it out together, at whatever pace felt comfortable for her. Over the following months, Nina gradually adapted to being part of Marco's world while maintaining her own identity and values. Marco made sure she never felt pressured to quit her job at the coffee shop, though he did offer to help when she mentioned wanting to go back to school. Nina eventually accepted his help with tuition, though she insisted on treating it as a loan she would repay once she finished her degree. A year after they met in the rain, Marco proposed to Nina in the same spot where she had first shared her umbrella with him. He got down on one knee in the rain, holding the blue umbrella over both of them, and asked if she would share more than just an umbrella with him. Nina said yes through tears of joy, and they kissed under the blue umbrella that had brought them together. They married in a ceremony that blended both their worlds, with Nina's coffee shop colleagues sitting alongside Marco's business associates. Nina wore a beautiful but not ostentatious dress, and Marco wore a suit similar to the one he had been wearing the day they met. During his toast, Marco told everyone that the best investment he had ever made was accepting shelter under a blue umbrella from a kind stranger who had seen him as simply human. Nina added that the best decision she had ever made was choosing kindness over convenience, and she was grateful every day that she had shared her umbrella with a rain-soaked stranger. Their story became a reminder that small acts of kindness could lead to extraordinary outcomes, and that genuine connection transcended social status or wealth. The blue umbrella held a place of honor in their home, a symbol of the moment when everything changed. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love and kindness. Leave a comment about a time when a small act of generosity led to something meaningful in your life.